BLM and George Floyd and COVID came around. And then the social pressure on them as a national nonprofit was immense. And they wanted me to start making statements about George Floyd or BLM or COVID. They wanted me to have all the employees get masked or vaccinated. I'm like, I'm just a hard no on all of these things, because in what world do you, as the CEO of a data company, decide you're going to ostracize some of your customers by making this big political statement one way or the other? And they could not see that because the pressure from the left was so strong.
And your workforce was still largely based out of Moscow.
It was largely based out of Moscow and largely Christian. And I knew that they would have a smoking crater on their hands if I did what they said.
Where was the Strata headquarters?
They were in Indianapolis,
okay,
but a lot of tight ties to DC.
Yeah, so
right,
not a very different cultural workforce.
Very, very different, right? And so now we're in this moment, and I had fights with their legal department. Then they started looking into the culture that I was building. And look, I was striving to have a distinctly Christian culture, even if there were not Christians as the owners of the organization. And so we had kind of three guiding principles for our business. First, we bless the customer, and that means we want them to be better off even if they don't buy anything. We want them to be better at doing their job. We want them to be able to use data to make better decisions in their organizations, even if they don't pay us money. And when you do that, it's amazing. Customers love you. And so bless the customer, then bless the employee. I wanted every employee to be a better person because they worked for me. Not just a better employee, but a better person, better father, husband, wife, mother, etc. And when you do that, it's amazing, because I would tell employees, look, you're probably not going to retire here at this company. And so I want you to be a better employee for your next employer. And when you say stuff like that, it's funny how nobody leaves, right? Everyone struggles with retention, but when you hold on tight to all your employees and you're desperate to not lose anybody, you generally lose everybody.
Yeah.
But when you're saying, look, I want you to be better people so that you can have a better job somewhere else, so that you can be a better member of society, it's funny, our turnover was shockingly low, right? So bless the customer, bless the employees, and then bless the shareholder, because we are people under authority. We should understand that. Shareholders should be part of this. But if shareholders understand that customers come first, then employees, the shareholders are going to do very well. And they did do very well as part of this organization. So we were striving for that. And every new employee that came into the business, I would ask them, I would say, look, I don't, you can come from whatever faith tradition you want, but I'm an unapologetic conservative CEO who is a Christian, and I'm going to run the business like that. If that's a problem for you, probably this isn't the right place for you. And I only had 3 employees over 15 years, or potential employees, say, that just makes me uncomfortable. Like, great. That just saved us both a lot of time. And actually, my lawyer's like, for you to say that, it's kind of like the equivalent of saying the contents of this cup might be hot. And then if someone burns themselves, it's like, well, I told you I was a Christian CEO. I'm going to pray at dinners. I'm going to, and I said, the ramifications of that are we're not going to have politics in the office. So if someone comes into my office and says, hey, you as the CEO are doing a terrible job, then they might get a raise, because I want to listen to that input. But if they come in my office and say, Nick is doing a terrible job, and they haven't talked to Nick first, they might get fired on the spot, because I did not want a culture where you could talk behind each other's back. We had a kegerator in the office, but I said, look, the beer is for us to have fun and live in the joy of life, but not to get drunk. And if you get drunk at work, I'm going to fire you for that too. So there were ramifications of this Christian culture in the business. And I had a lot of people who did not have any sort of Christian background. Like, this is the safest, healthiest, happiest business I've ever been in. The board did not agree with that. So they actually got a Boston law firm to do a dossier on the culture that I was building, and that was not a happy thing. So they ended up selling it, I think, despite me, to KKR's ESG fund. So, and if you know anything, KKR, barbarians in the gate, the whole situation, right? And you can guess that KKR's ESG fund was not a fan of me.
What was the even vaguely colorable reason to sell it to the ESG fund to begin with? Why was the ESG fund interested?
Because it's people. So it was, environmental, social. Yeah. It's a social aspect, right? Oh, we're helping people get better jobs.
Yeah.
Yada, yada, yada. Well, so, yeah. So.
Well, it's interesting too, like having been to your office in Moscow, like you can see the building from those windows in your office. Like it's still there. So tell us more about that, transition into starting RedBalloon and all of that.
Yeah. So it's all right. I've been monologuing on all this stuff. So
it's all great.
It interesting because this was, I'll be honest, very, very painful, right? I built this business over 20 years and I'd done some of these other businesses. I was on the NSA board for a bit. I'd helped Logos. I'm on the ACCS, Association of Classical Christian Schools National Board. So I had other interests, but Emsi really was my main thing. And I was trying to figure out, how do we build a distinctly Christian culture that drives prosperity for Moscow? And so when you get fired, and it wasn't firing, when you're a CEO, they say, we would like you to be an advisor to the board. So you get this promotion, meaning we don't want you around anymore. So when that happened, it was really hard because for 20 years, I was the guy who was running this business. We just built a new 70,000 square foot headquarters in Moscow. We were the dominant employer. I had a...
you guys were the biggest private sector employer in the city, probably?
For sure. Yeah. For sure. I had a Christmas contest where we gave away like $15,000 a year in Christmas decoration prizes. Like, I was like, I'm going to lean into, because who doesn't like Christmas? And if Christ came and changed the world, we should celebrate it like we mean it. So anyway, so I get kicked out effectively, which is interesting because they long story boring, KKR had bought another business that was our top competitor, and we were slowly putting them out of business. And so KKR was about to take a 9-figure loss on that business. So they could outbid everybody else for the business by 9 figures and still come out ahead because they would just combine the businesses. So they took the CEO of that failing business and put him over the whole thing. Which I knew would not last, because even if you have the right social media profile, you still have to be good at your job, it turns out. And so that only lasted for 4 or 5 months, and then they got rid of him, and now they have another CEO in there. But it was a hard transition because a lot of my identity was tied up in, this is my job, this is what I'm doing, and I needed to transition, as a Christian, to know my identity's in Christ, and I need to not be distracted by this desire for, I was the ring giver. I was the one who gave the great jobs, who made a ton of money. And now I was the guy who was, I moved to a small office in one of my buildings, and it was like, and here I am. But that's okay. And God used that. My wife actually wrote an article in the Federalist, and this is a transition to RedBalloon, saying my husband wasn't fired, he was redeployed. And if God redeploys you to do something else, you can't question that, right? As a soldier. So, and that's kind of ties me back to the RedBalloon story.
I really do want to get into the RedBalloon stuff, but over the course of you telling that narrative, I sort of realized, and you would kind of slyly mention each time, you've seen almost every element of how modern business life works, ranging from venture capital to mergers and acquisitions to scaling from a small to a medium to, 280 is large is a strong word, but in the grand scheme of things, you've seen private equity, you've seen ESG up close. I just want to run through a couple of those different elements because I think it's interesting. Going back to the beginning, I mean, do you think that the VC model of funding, I guess specifically software companies, results in perverse incentives? I mean, how do you think that system should work? Or do you think that it should be a smaller piece of the pie than it currently is?
Yeah, I do think it should be a smaller piece of the pie. There are some businesses that I don't know if there's a way to scale them without massive injection of capital, right? And pick on like a two-sided marketplace, like my friends over at Public Square. So they're trying to build a marketplace with consumers and businesses, and they've got to find each other. Well, the problem is if you're Public Square and you are carefully trying to grow, then and not burning through a lot of capital. Well, let's say you only have one coffee shop in all of DC in your app. Well, the problem is if a consumer comes, looks, and like, oh, yep, I don't see anything here, they probably will just get rid of the app and not use it again, right? And that's it's a problem we struggle with RedBalloon a little bit. And you look at organizations like Uber or others where basically it's a scale business, and you either have scale or you have nothing. So I think those type of businesses, it's inevitable that you have to have some significant injection of capital to be able to get over the hump. You look at Yelp. Yelp took $400 million to be able to get to profitable. ZipRecruiter took $700 million of injected capital of investment to get to profitable. So some of these two-sided businesses need that. Or you look at an Indeed.com, who is a big woke job board. They only took $5 million of capital 20 years ago, which is, the equivalent of call it $20 million of capital today. And comparatively, but they took 20 years, they almost took 10 years to really get to the point where they were to scale, and they really struggled for a long time. So I'd say some businesses, that's the case. There's other businesses where it's actually just the lazy man's way of getting yourself a big salary, because it is way easier to raise capital than customers. Believe it or not, like I could go and pitch a VC, especially with my background at this point, and I could get almost anything funded. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be able to find product market fit and actually bless customers and actually build a revenue positive business. So I think it has become a crutch for a lot of people to not deal with the market tension of I need to have a great product that is valuable for our customers enough that it pays all my bills. Right. And, you even look at DoorDash today. DoorDash is still losing massive amounts of money. Yeah. And they've got to figure out how to solve that, because at some point it used to be you would invest in a business for the return, not just for the hope of growth. Right. And I think that's the kind of perverse incentive in the market right now.